Okay, so welcome to well, my second live coding session. I don't know what number this is for all of you, but today I you're welcome. You're welcome in advance because I'm about to make your life a whole lot easier with two things called array lists and while loops. And I'm going to be honest, this is something I've wanted to talk about uh, since last semester. There have been so many situations where array lists and while loops would have made your lives just a little bit easier, and now you finally get introduced to them. So a lot of difficulties with for loops and with standard Java arrays are about to go away. So I hope you're excited. So let me share my screen and go over what we're dealing with. Okay, so there we go. So let's first talk about what the difference between an array and an array list is. When we go ahead and create an array in Java, I'll give us some space here. We would say let's go ahead and give us an array of strings. Uh, uh, so this is how you would create an array of strings with exactly 6 strings in there. How would I create an array with 7 strings? Well, oh, that's easy. You change 6 to 7. The thing to know here is that if I leave this blank, what does Tammy refer to the red lines as? This line is crying. I recently learned that one. Why? Variable must provide either dimension expressions or an array initializer. What it's saying is we're not allowed to create an array in Java with, for your purposes right now, without telling it exactly how big the array needs to be. It can be whatever size we want, but I say in here that it holds 99. It's always going to hold 99 slots. If I don't fill it with 99 strings, some of them can be left blank, but those are still going to be there. This is the egg carton metaphor. You can have an egg carton that has 12 little divots for 12 eggs, and you can use some of the eggs, but the egg carton is not going to get any smaller. It's always going to be 12. Some of them can be empty, some of them can be full. It doesn't matter. We're not shrinking that egg carton. And that's fine for a lot of things. It's what we want in many situations, actually. But in certain situations, it is absolutely not useful. For example, if you want to make a program that goes through your current class of students, and your current class has 20 students, you can go ahead and you can give every single student a name and change this to student. I'll say student array because I've used students later. And I can say, student array, my first student will be Bobby. And I can go through and for every single of these 20 seats, name a student and so on. You know how to do this. But if we want to create a program, for example, something that calculates the grades of every student in a class, and we start making our class size dependent on an array, we have a problem. We can't change that. And you don't always have exactly 20 students in your class. You probably have different numbers of students in the classes that you teach right now. And next year, you're going to have different numbers of students as well. We could just make each array hold 100 students and deal with it that way, but that wastes memory in the computer. That's not efficient. And what if instead of clearing out the entire array, we just replace the first 14 students with your current class, but oh, students 15 through 20 from last year are still in there because we forgot to get rid of them, because we forgot that the size of our array was larger than the size of our class. There are a lot of problems. Arrays can be messy and inefficient, especially when you have variable numbers of things to deal with, like different numbers of students in different classes. So arrays, my metaphor is egg cartons. Array lists, my metaphor is a grocery list. It's something where you can literally just keep adding things to it. And to give you a sense of it, I'm going to copy these two lines up here and walk you through how to create an array list of strings. It's very similar to declaring an array, except we write array list and then in angle brackets write the variable type, in this case string, and then we name it like anything else, and then we say equals new array list, once again those angle brackets, string, and then finish off with the smooth parentheses. One quick thing to note, you will have to import the array list from Java util. In the same way that you say Java util, import java.util.scanner, you also need to say import java.util.ArrayList to use array lists. This might indicate to you that array lists are a little more special, or at least not default compared to arrays. And then to add to an array list, let's say the student here is Susie. Already we can see a difference. Here, Bobby might be the first student, but the size of student array is 100, and it will always be 100, and it will never be less than 100. Here in the array list, if I comment this out, the size is 0. If I add this, the size becomes 1. Actually, I'm going to prove that to you. Let's say system.out.println initial size is, and I can say students dot size, and I'm going to copy that and paste it here and say new size is blank. And take a quick second. This is probably an easy one, but what do you expect it to print out for initial size and new size?
0 and 1.
Exactly. And let me, well, I say exactly, but let me double check because I'm often wrong. Thankfully, not here. Wonderful. Okay, there we go. Sorry, did you all see that? Did I go away for a second?
I saw it.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, Zoom flashed off for a moment. So yeah, and then it can get even cooler because I can keep adding new students. I can say Tammy, Maya, Rich, and run it again. And it keeps getting bigger. The size of our array list is only as big as we need it to be. And this is really useful for us because now, instead of having this fixed size egg carton, if we're going to the grocery store, we don't always have 100 items that we need to buy. Or let's make it more realistic. We don't always have 20 items that we need to buy. Sometimes it's 10 items or fewer. Sometimes it's far more than 20. With an array list, the list size is only ever as big as we need it to be. And in the same way, my mom will carry a big long grocery list, and she'll like fold over the items that she's already purchased, and her list becomes physically shorter. So too does an array list get shorter when we remove items. So I'm gonna make a new section for this and prove that to you. And I'll say final size. And I'm gonna say and here's another thing. In a lot of situations, you might not want to just go based on Eclipse's like default suggestions, but it's not a bad thing if ever you're curious about what an object can do to just scroll through these. So we say get index of, that can tell us where an item is. But here we're gonna actually pull remove and say, let's say I want to get rid of Susie because Susie's not a coworker or not someone I work with, but I work with Tammy, Maya, and Rich. So I want this list to reflect that. So I'm going to actually remove that. And just like my mom's grocery list, it doesn't just stay at 4. We're not crossing out the line and clearing it in the same way that we would in an array. When we remove an item in an array list, it goes away. So now, okay, now I have an actual tricky question for you. Let's see. The first student is there we go. Instead of using square brackets like you would for arrays, you need to actually use a .get method and put the index in to retrieve the name in this case, or the data within that spot. So we start off, we have an array of 4 students. That's why new size is 4. Susie, Tammy, Maya, and Rich. I remove the student at index 0. What gets printed out here? The first student is blank. Any guesses?
Tammy?
Yeah, let's check it out. Bingo. Because if we go up here, and at this point, it'll say Susie and then Tammy. So first student is Susie. We delete Susie. We delete the first element at index 0. And now our array list is smaller and our index changes. This right here is sometimes a big detriment to array lists. This is why a lot of times people still turn to arrays, because the size of an array is the size of an array is the size of an array is the size of an array. It will never change. Going back to your example of the grade book before, where the very first column was always the student's name and every other column corresponded to a grade, you would always know the student's name by checking column 0. Here, that doesn't always work out, because you can see how if name gets removed, now suddenly index 0 is the first grade. And it gets a little bit messy in terms of consistent data. So I'm not saying throw arrays out. I'm not saying get rid of arrays. Still know them, still love them. But array lists are a lot more flexible, which is fantastic when you need that flexibility. So I have an array list. Why on earth is this useful? Well, first of all, do we have any questions about adding and removing elements of an array at the moment? Any questions at all?
When we add to the array, does it always go to like the bottom of the list? Like in this case, it would be now number 5.
Yes.
Just
So every time I say add, it always is getting added to the bottom. If I wanted to, let's see. Oh, where's that one? If I wanted to change a specific value, I could set oh, you know what, let's switch these up. So now we start off by adding Susie to the list. And then we say, set Tammy at index 0. And then add Maya and add Rich. What is going to be the new student size? And who's going to be the first student? Anyone? All right, let's check it out. Let's see what this set command does. So here, the first student is actually Tammy. So we have this list. This list is empty. We say Susie is our first list item. We write Susie on the piece of paper. And then when we say set Tammy at index 0, that's what this line is. The set command takes an index and a value. And so we want to put Tammy on that first index on the list. So we're actually going to erase Susie from that list and write in Tammy. And then we add Maya on index 1 and Rich at index 2. So we only ever have three values in that list, because in the first version, we went 1, 2, 3, 4, and just kept adding new ones, which did get added to the very bottom. Now we say, add Susie to the list, set Tammy at that same index, erase Susie and write in Tammy, then add Maya and Rich. So now that's why our new student size of this result is just Tammy, Maya, and Rich. And the first student is Tammy. And then when we remove 0, we're actually removing Tammy from the list. So we have Tammy, Maya, and Rich. We remove Tammy. And so now we have an array list of length 2, just holding Maya and Rich. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions about the nature of array lists? Because they're great, but they're very different from what you've been dealing with so far with arrays. Anyone? Okay. Can you tell I'm excited? I really like array lists and I really like while loops. So I was very excited when Tammy told me that would be the topic for this one. So let's give you a practical example, because I have been talking about make-believe, the students and make-believe lists and groceries for some reason. Let me give you something you can use. Let's go back to our old friend, the scanner. And let's take a break. Let's take a break from array lists, switch gears, and talk about loops. If we wanted to record the names of the students in the class so far, how have we done it? We can create a for loop and say int I equals I is less than let's say we want let's say we want 3 students to start off with to make it simple. And we could say, so we sync up the length of this array with how many times the for loop is going to loop around. And we could say enter student name. And then here we could say student array at index I equals next line. And we run it, and it's going to look like Maya, Tammy, Rich, and it finishes. You know what? I'm going to make a print statement for this. I is less than length. Let's say, there we go. So our, oh, interesting highlighting. So here we have created an array that holds Maya, Tammy, and Rich. This is fine. This works perfectly well. But what happens if we're treating this as like my classroom of students? And, you know, sure, we could change this to 20. You know what, we can make it a little more proper to code by, so now we only have to write the number of students once. I'll run through this quickly. Random names. Okay, great. Here's my roster of made up students. This does not work for any number of students other than 10. How have we solved that in the past? Well, you could say, you could add another prompt in the beginning and say, how many students do you have in your class? Oh, it's 10. Okay, got it. And then you set this based on a variable, and that works fine. You've done it before. You know how to do it. It does work. How else can you get variable number of things? You could take one long input and do comma separated values. So you could say, you know, Tammy, comma Maya, comma Rich as a single string, and then split that string up into an array. That also works. But that was never my gut reaction. When I saw you guys working through the problems before, I wanted to say, oh, well, you should just use while loops and array lists, because once you have these tools, they make your life so much easier, and you're going to want to do it this way. Let me prove to you that it's way easier when you're doing something like getting an unknown number of values to put them into an array or an array list. Why this while loop array list combo is so powerful. So what is a while loop? Oh, a while loop functions almost exactly like a for loop, but the difference is a while loop is not bound based on this conditional like for loops. For loops are fantastic for a specific number of repetitions. That's how they're primarily used. If you need to go through and do something X number of times, reach for a for loop at any time of the day. But if there's another condition that you want satisfied before you stop looping, you might want to take a step back and give while loops a try. Let me make this a little bit neater and give us some more space to look at. For example, I want to say, I'm gonna save this here. We're not gonna use it, but I'll leave it there just so you can see the difference. Actually, I'll keep that line. So I'm gonna create a value that is, I'll just call it input value. Input val equals, oh, and I want it to operate in there. Let's, oh, you know what? Hold on, you'll see the method to my madness in a second. I'm going to create a new string called input val. And first I will set it to an empty string. In the while loop, I'm going to turn input val into whatever the user has typed in. What I'm going to do is say, let's see, I'll do this without array lists first, but I think you'll see how array lists can be used before we implement it. Let's say while true, and let's just loop this forever. Oh, hold on. This error is coming up because it recognized that the code would never proceed past this while loop before. It's still never going to pass this while loop because I don't change B from anything other than true. But I'm going to trick this for a second. So I'm going to say, it's not prompting me, but what it's looking for is a student name. So I'm going to say Tammy. My student's name is Tammy. Great. Wonderful. I can just keep on adding student names. And it can hold these values. Great. It's going to go forever. So clearly we need some way for this to stop, because if you haven't already figured it out, the while loop, everything within the curly brackets runs forever on a loop as long as whatever's in the parentheses is true. In the same way that for loops will keep running forever as long as whatever is in this middle condition is true. Once I becomes equal to or greater than studentArray.length, that for loop stops. In this case, if B ever changes, then it would stop running. Does that alone make sense? How a while loop differs from a for loop? Please ask me questions if any of this so far was unclear. No one? Okay. Continuing on. This, I hope you can see, is great to allow us to say something else in this while condition. It doesn't have to be go forever, because a loop forever is a little less useful for us. So I'm going to say, as long as input val doesn't equal, and that exclamation point equal sign means does not equal, let's have it be a code that we know would obviously not be a student's name. And so I'll say end in all caps. And so now this while loop will continue to run as long as, you know what, I really should give a prompt here. What is your student's name. There we go. So as soon as I say end, as soon as instead of giving a student's name, I write end in all caps, this thing is going to run forever. So let's try it out. What is your student's name? Johnny, Maya, Tammy, Rich, wonderful. Now I'm going to say end. Wait. What am I doing wrong? Hold on. Input val equals next line. Maybe that'll do it? Hold on. Sorry, technical difficulties. You know what? I'm going to make my life a little bit easier. And instead of troubleshooting that right now, because I don't immediately have an answer, as long as the string doesn't contain the word end, we're going to keep running. What is the student's name? Johnny, Maya, Tammy, end. Okay. Sorry. Leaving this for loop here was a bad idea. It was leaving the first for loop and going to the next one. Okay, great. Let me just, for the sake of safety, get rid of everything below what we're dealing with. Okay. So now I can say Johnny, Rich, and student's name is end, and I can't type anymore. Great. Okay. So in practice, you would want a condition that makes sure that this doesn't print out as long as it's if there's end in the word. But basically, now we've run this loop 3 times. Once for Johnny, once for Rich, and once for the end case. Let's try it again with Johnny, Maya, Tammy, Rich, Don, Joanne, Leela, and now let's say end. Great. And now I can't type anything else. Now we've looped 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Now we have variable number of loops. And I hope you can see how this can be useful to us in tandem with array lists. If we can get a variable number of loops, we can get a variable number of elements in an array list. Does all of this make sense before I do my big finish and drive all of this home and make your lives a lot easier? How are things going? Don't feel bad about breaking my momentum with a question, please. Anyone? You all understand this totally? Okay. There are still people on here, right? Yeah, we have 7 people. Okay. All right. I hope that means I'm explaining it well and that you guys aren't just so lost you have no idea what to ask. So variable number of loops, variable number of students that we want to put in the array list. Let's combine them. So I'm going to take the array list that we created up here and toss it up here. So now we've created a scanner we have our input value, and we have our while loop. I hope you guys can see the parallels between the for loop and the while loop, because I'm gonna get rid of this one, or I'll leave it there because seeing the input to the array might be nice. You know what? Maybe that's nicer up there. Okay, so I'm creating a new array list called students, and then every time I would say your student is named input val, I'm going to say students.add input val. And because I don't want it to say end, I'm going to say if input val contains end, the same condition as our while loop. If actually, I don't want it to run if it contains end. I want it to run if it doesn't contain end. So now it's going to say, what's your student's name? Take the input that you type in. And as long as the input does not have end in all caps in it, it's going to print out your student is named input val. And then it's going to add that student's name to the array list. And I'm going to uncomment this because once everything is ended, I'm going to add a system.out.println called class roster. You know what? I'm excited. And I'm going to say for students.length, system.out.println, students dot, not contains, get. Okay, sorry, I went a little fast there. First thing to note, to get how many items are in an array list, we use size. If ever you're not sure what to use between size and length, try writing one of them, see if it cries, and switch to the opposite one if it does. You just saw an example of me doing that. I get mixed up sometimes, and this is a perfectly acceptable way to check. Programming, guesses are free nowadays. Compute power is easy. I wasted, such a minimal amount of electricity checking that twice. And then I'm going to print out the student. To get the value in an array element, you use the square brackets. To get the value of an element of an array list, we use the .get command, and then same thing, you put the index in. So all together, we are going to create a scanner, set the value of this random holding string variable, create an array list called students, check to see if that value contains the end code, prompt the user to give the student's name, set input val, our string variable, to whatever the user typed, check to see if the user typed the end code, and if they didn't, print out your student is named, and then the student name, just so we can double check with ourselves that everything's good. I'm gonna make this a println for clarity. And then we're gonna add that student's name to our students array. And at the end, we are going to say, here's your class roster, and then go through every single student in that array list and print out the name. And here's the best part. It does not matter how many students you have. You can say, I'm teaching Johnny, Tammy, Maya, Rich, Joanne, Leela, Dawn, everyone, and then end it. And here is our beautiful class roster. But next class, it's more It's tinier because I don't want to write out more names. The next class only has one student named Michael. And that's it. It's just Michael in the class. We end it. And now our class roster is only size 1. This can work for any number of students. I could write 1,000 students in this class roster and it still works. You can make your code to figure out the grades for your students function year by year without having to change a thing. And every single class, it's going to be a different size and it'll still work. And you won't need to remember what your code did 3 years ago because it's going to still work. I mean, you should still comment your code and make sure you can read your own code, but it's going to work no matter what the class size is. Can you tell I really like while loops and array lists? These are incredibly useful. Does all of this make sense so far? I say so far. That's my big finish. That's what we're doing. That's what this is, while loops and array lists. Any questions about all of this? Because I hope this is going to make your lives doing the work in the class and programming in the future so much easier and more intuitive, because you are no longer restricted to declaring an array of a specific size. You can make an array list that gets bigger and gets smaller as you're adding and removing elements. So, any questions?
I'll buy it, Johnny. You convinced me.
What'd you say?
I'll buy it.
Yeah, are you excited? You like array lists too?
Okay, so
Mhm.
just so I understand correctly, you have to have the condition in the parentheses where it says while, but then you also have to have that if statement in there as well.
Yes.
Otherwise,
So
it won't.
it'll still run without the if statement. I'll just go ahead and remove it for us to take a look at it. What do we think would happen if I removed this? Does anyone want to try to guess? Okay, the fact that no one knows the answer means that was a fantastic question. Thank you for bringing that up. Let's say we have Johnny and Tammy, and that's the whole class because I don't want to write a bunch, and we say end. Now, our class roster includes the end code. Because remember, the end code is still given as input val, and within the while loop, we need to add the we need to add whatever the student's name is to the array list. The only reason I added this if statement was to make sure that at the very end, when input val equals end, that it doesn't think end is a student. Because here it says your student is named end and it adds end to the class roster. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense.
Awesome. Good. Yeah, thank you for that, because I really just I breezed through that. Another way you could do it, if you don't want to have this code, let's bring it back the way it was. At the end of the while loop, you could actually say students dot remove students dot size. Size -1. So what this does is it actually adds end to the array list, and then at the end of the while loop it just says, well, I know once I exit the while loop I need to get rid of the last one, so please go ahead and remove the element at size -1. And because we start counting in programming at 0, size -1 is the last element. I'll go ahead and prove that to you. There we go. It's still, notice here, it says your student is named N because this part still runs. It still adds it to the list, but but like as soon as I leave the while loop, I say, go ahead and delete that last thing. And they function, the mechanism of action, the way it does it is slightly different, but your end result is exactly the same. A class roster that does not contain the end code. Do both methods make sense to everyone?
Yep, I think it makes sense.
Okay, perfect. And whichever one you use is totally up to you. It does not matter. Any other questions about this? About while loops, about array lists, about using them together, about applying them in a classroom setting?
I do have a question. This is
Yeah.
Raquel. You know, when you input the word end,
Mhm.
isn't there a way you can put like make it case sensitive, like if it's uppercase or lowercase?
Ah, yes. So by default, it is case sensitive. So
Okay.
I could go ahead and write Johnny and then say end, and it still runs, and say end, and it goes and say end. But it's not until I say end with all caps that it stops. But if you want the reverse, so by default it is case sensitive. I could say if I could say two lowercase. That so what this means, what I just did was I say if, so while input val converted to lowercase contains lowercase end, while that is false, keep running. And as soon as there is end in any case, it stops. And this is actually something that's done pretty frequently, like converting all the letters to either upper or lowercase to ignore case, because you're absolutely right. It could be, what's your student's name? Johnny, and then I could say end, and now it ends. Or I could try again, and it also ends, and that's great. But if there are any sci-fi fans who like Orson Scott Card, you could say Ender, and that's a name in Ender's Game, and try to run it, and it doesn't count it. So that's why I do like it being case sensitive in this instance, because I couldn't think of any realistic names that have END in it, but I'm sure they're out there. So it is nice to add like a little more specifications there. But you could solve that by just having it be like a symbol, like a tilde. It doesn't have to be a word. It could be Johnny, Tammy, because I don't know of anyone's name that has a tilde in it, and that's something that you're unlikely to just accidentally press. So it can be whatever you want, but yeah, by default, it is case sensitive. And to make it not case sensitive, you would add that to lowercase or to uppercase and have it contain whatever that is in lowercase form. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, no problem. Anything else? We're at final countdown time. Any questions at all?
Could you write the condition in a different way that doesn't have to say like it's not? Like if it were with kind of like
Ooh.
the opposite, like if it is blank or if it equals blank.
I could. You absolutely can in general. Let's say I'm going to give a silly example, but let's say we had a whole class full of people named John. So now it's going to loop every single time John is added to the list. And wait, What was wrong with that? Hold on. Line 46. Move. Oh, hold on. Let's set the default value to John. It had a problem here because my initial default value was an empty string. And so it didn't loop the first time. So here it says, what's your name? And I'll say, John. Great, my student's name is John. I'll just keep on adding Johns to the list. And then I'm gonna add anything else. It will accept Johnny, but I could say Tammy, and that ends it. So you can include like, maybe you'd call them positive conditions, like a condition that doesn't begin with does not. But in this specific instance of does it contain this string, you would want, there are a lot more names that are not the word end than the word end. But in other cases, like if we're trying to loop across, you know what, we could do something else. We could say while students is less than, or dot size is less than 5. Let's say at your school, to be a legitimate class, you need at least 5 students. Or, you know, let's say the max class size at your school is 5 students. And suddenly the teacher shortage is gone, and we all have wonderful class sizes. We could set a condition that continues to run as long as our roster is less than a certain number. This is also a good way to like forcibly prevent overloading. If we change 5 to like 25 or something and say, okay, I will only accept 25 students and no more. So I'd say Johnny, Tammy, Maya, Rich, Joanne, there we go. And now, oh, I have 4 because I did less than, not less than or equal to. And it won't let me input anymore. So that's an example of a of something that doesn't start with the exclamation point, the not. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I guess the answer is yes, you can, but in certain cases, it's more useful than others. Yeah. Any more questions? Anything at all? I know we're out of time, so people are probably going to be heading out, but I'm happy to stay on a bit longer if there are more questions.
Okay, just to
Okay, I'm going to
clarify.
assume that's it. I'll casually throw out that you can create an index of your own that's an integer and then just have it increment within the while loop if you want, and literally just treat a while loop like for loops, and just have the condition be similar to this in like a numeric condition, and add your plus plus down here and set your integer up there. You use while loops for everything. Use them when they're not necessary. Don't actually. For loops are great for what they do. But yeah, that's it. Array lists and while loops. I hope by now you see why I was so excited about them, and I hope that that this is helpful for you, and you'll be able to use this in your own work going forward. But have a great night, everyone. I hope you learned something.
Thank you very much.
Thank
You're welcome.
you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good one. See ya.
Thank you.
Enjoy your weekend, everyone.
You too.